England, 1851. The rain began before the wedding breakfast had ended. It drummed softly against the tall windows of St. Martin's Hall as Lady Annabel Lancaster sat beside her new husband, scarcely tasting the food placed before her. The guests talked, laughed, and toasted the future of the newly married Duke and Duchess of Ravenmore, but their voices seemed distant, as though she were listening from beneath water. Across the table sat Andrew Bedford, Duke of Ravenmore. At 31 years old, he possessed a commanding presence that drew attention wherever he went. His dark hair was neatly groomed, his posture perfect, and his gray eyes revealed almost nothing of his thoughts. He had spoken fewer than 20 words to her since the ceremony. Annabel folded her hands in her lap. Like many young women of noble birth, she had dreamed of marriage once. Not necessarily of romance but of companionship, of friendship, of building a home with someone who might eventually become dear to her. Instead, she had become a solution to a financial disaster. Her father's debts had become impossible to hide. The Duke's wealth had become impossible to refuse. And so she had married a stranger. When the final guests began departing, Annabel expected they would travel to London. Instead, Andrew approached her carriage and said calmly, "We leave for Devon immediately." She blinked. "Devon, Your Grace?" His expression remained unreadable. "My principal residence is there." No further explanation followed. The journey lasted 2 exhausting days. The further south they traveled, the narrower the roads became. The bustling towns gradually gave way to rugged coastline, rolling hills, and isolated fishing villages battered by sea winds. By the second evening, the sky had darkened into shades of violet and silver. Then Annabel saw Blackthorn Manor. The enormous stone house stood atop cliffs overlooking a violent sea. Waves crashed against jagged rocks far below. The manor itself looked less like a home and more like an ancient fortress guarding the coastline. Its towers rose against the horizon. Its windows reflected the fading light. And somehow, despite its beauty, it felt lonely. Very lonely. "Welcome to Blackthorn Manor," Andrew said. There was no pride in his voice. Only duty. Servants appeared immediately upon their arrival. A stern housekeeper named Mrs. Whitmore supervised the household with military precision. Footmen carried trunks upstairs. Maids hurried through corridors. Everything seemed efficient. Yet something felt strange. No one smiled. No one laughed. The entire house felt as though it were holding its breath. That first evening, Annabel dined alone. The Duke excused himself shortly after their arrival, claiming estate business required his attention. She did not see him again until the following morning. And even then only briefly. Days passed. Then weeks. Life at Blackthorn Manor settled into a routine. Breakfast arrived promptly. Household accounts required supervision. Letters demanded answers. The duties of a duchess occupied her hours. Yet despite the size of the house, Annabel found herself increasingly isolated. Andrew was rarely present. When he was home, he often disappeared into his study. Other evenings he left the manor entirely. Sometimes he returned after midnight. Sometimes before dawn. Annabel never asked where he went. He never volunteered the information. One afternoon she attempted conversation during tea. "Have you always lived here?" Andrew glanced up from a document. "Mostly." "You prefer Devon to London?" Pause. "Yes." His answer ended there. Annabel stared into her teacup. Conversation with her husband felt like knocking on a locked door. Another oddity soon emerged. Entire sections of Blackthorn Manor remained closed. Certain hallways were always locked. Several rooms appeared untouched for years. Once she asked Mrs. Whitmore about a wing on the eastern side of the house. The housekeeper immediately stiffened. "That area is not in use, Your Grace." The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. Annabel became curious. Curiosity grew into suspicion. Why maintain an entire wing of a grand estate only to keep it permanently sealed? Meanwhile, strange things continued occurring. The villagers became uncomfortable whenever the Duke's name was mentioned. The local lighthouse keeper abruptly ended conversations whenever Andrew appeared. Servants exchanged nervous glances when certain topics arose. It was as though everyone shared a secret. Everyone except Annabel. One particularly stormy afternoon, curiosity finally overcame caution. Rain rattled against the windows. Most of the household remained occupied below stairs. Annabel quietly climbed the eastern staircase. She reached the locked corridor. To her surprise, one door stood slightly open. Perhaps a servant had forgotten. Heart pounding, she stepped inside. Dust floated through shafts of pale light. Furniture lay draped beneath white sheets. Portraits leaned against walls. Old trunks stood abandoned in corners. The entire wing felt frozen in time. Then she noticed a painting. It rested against a far wall. The frame was covered in dust. Carefully she wiped the surface clean. A young man stared back at her. For one stunned moment she thought it was Andrew. The resemblance was extraordinary. The same gray eyes. The same dark hair. The same aristocratic features. Yet this man smiled openly. Beside him stood a younger version of Andrew. Brothers. The realization struck instantly. A brass plaque beneath the portrait read, Lord William Bedford and Lord Andrew Bedford. Summer 1845. Annabel frowned. She had never heard of William. Later that evening she searched through old family records hidden inside a neglected cabinet. There she found confirmation. Lord William Bedford, younger brother of the Duke, died 5 years earlier. Cause of death, boating accident. Age at death, 21. The information should have satisfied her. Instead it raised more questions. Why hide the portraits? Why seal the rooms? Why avoid mentioning him? Most importantly, why did Andrew never speak of his brother? That night Annabel lay awake long after midnight. Wind howled outside. Something about the story felt incomplete. The following weeks only deepened her suspicions. She occasionally caught Andrew staring toward the sea from distant windows. His expression always carried the same haunted look. A look she could not understand. Then one evening, shortly before midnight, she noticed movement outside. Andrew was leaving the manor. Alone. Without servants. Without a carriage. Without explanation. Acting on impulse, Annabel threw on a cloak and followed. The night was cold. Moonlight spilled across the cliffs. She remained far enough behind to avoid detection. Andrew followed a narrow path leading toward the edge of the coastline. The sea crashed violently below. The wind tugged at Annabel's hood. Finally he stopped. A stone cross stood near the cliff's edge. Weathered by years of salt and storms. Andrew knelt before it. From his coat he removed fresh white flowers. Carefully, almost reverently, he placed them at the base of the cross. For several moments he remained motionless. Annabel could not hear his words. Then the wind shifted. And his voice carried across the darkness. Raw. Broken. Nothing like the controlled man she knew. I am sorry. Silence. Another wave crashed below. Then came the words that changed everything. I should have died instead of you. Annabel froze. The grief in his voice was unmistakable. Not guilt. Not regret. Devastating grief. For the first time since their marriage, she saw beyond the distant Duke of Ravenmore. Behind the cold reserve. Behind the silence. Behind the walls he had built around himself. There was a man carrying a wound that had never healed. And standing alone on the cliffs above the sea, Annabel realized she knew almost nothing about her husband. But she intended to learn. Annabel did not sleep that night. The image of Andrew kneeling beside the stone cross remained fixed in her mind long after she returned to Blackthorn Manor. For months she had believed her husband indifferent, cold, unfeeling. A man who merely tolerated her presence. But the grief she had witnessed upon the cliffs told a different story. No one spoke those words unless they carried a burden too heavy to bear. I should have died instead of you. The next morning Andrew appeared at breakfast as composed as ever. He sat at the head of the table reviewing correspondence while sunlight filtered through the tall windows. There was no trace of the broken man she had seen the night before. Did you sleep well? He asked politely. Annabel studied him. Reasonably. He nodded. The conversation ended. Yet for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Manor, Annabel was no longer interested in escaping her husband. She wanted to understand him. And to do that, she needed to understand William Bedford. Over the following week, she quietly began asking questions. Not openly. Carefully. The villagers were reluctant to speak. Some refused entirely. Others exchanged nervous glances before changing the subject. The most revealing conversation occurred with an elderly fisherman named Thomas Briggs. She found him repairing nets near the harbor. Did you know Lord William? She asked. The old man stopped working. His weathered face tightened. Aye. What was he like? A faint smile appeared. Kind lad. Did you know him well? Well enough. Annabel hesitated. They say he drowned. The fisherman looked toward the sea. For several moments he said nothing. Then he muttered, That's what they say. The answer sent a chill through her. Not yes. Not certainly. Only, that's what they say. That evening she wrote everything down. The more people she spoke to, the stranger the story became. No two versions matched. Some claimed William had drowned during a storm. Others insisted his boat had never been found. One elderly servant even whispered that William had been seen alive weeks after his supposed death. The mystery only deepened. Meanwhile, something else was changing. Her relationship with Andrew. A violent autumn storm struck the coastline 3 days later. The winds were the strongest seen in years. Fishing boats were destroyed. Several cottages near the cliffs suffered severe damage. Andrew immediately organized relief efforts. To Annabel's surprise, he did not remain safely inside the manor. He spent entire days helping villagers, repairing roofs, distributing supplies, inspecting damage personally. Without hesitation, Annabel joined him. For nearly a week they worked side by side. And for the first time she saw the man hidden beneath the title. The Duke who terrified London society was completely different here. Children ran toward him without fear. Farmers greeted him warmly. Fishermen respected him. He knew people by name. He remembered their families, their struggles, their needs. One afternoon, after delivering blankets to an elderly widow, Annabel looked at him in disbelief. "You know every tenant on the estate." Andrew shrugged. "I should. Most noblemen wouldn't." His expression darkened slightly. "Most noblemen rarely leave their drawing rooms." Annabel laughed unexpectedly. To her surprise, Andrew laughed too. The sound caught both of them off guard. For a brief moment, neither felt like strangers. That evening they shared dinner alone. For once, conversation came naturally. They discussed books, history, travel, childhood memories. Hours passed before either noticed. When Andrew finally rose from the table, there was warmth in his eyes she had never seen before. "You seem happier lately," he observed. Annabel smiled. "Perhaps because I finally feel useful." For a moment he looked as though he wanted to say more. Instead he simply nodded. "Good night, Annabel." "Good night, Andrew." The following week brought another breakthrough. While exploring the abandoned eastern wing once more, Annabel discovered a hidden compartment behind an old bookcase. Inside lay a leather-bound journal. Dust covered its surface. Her pulse quickened when she opened it. The first page bore a familiar name: William Bedford. The journal detailed the final year of William's life. At first the entries seemed ordinary. Estate visits, social events, family matters. Then the tone changed. Gradually, subtly. William began writing about financial irregularities, missing funds, forged signatures, suspicious transactions. One name appeared repeatedly: Edmund Hawthorne, the Bedford family's longtime financial advisor. William clearly believed Hawthorne was stealing from the estate. The final entries grew increasingly urgent. "I have proof now. Andrew must see these documents. If Hawthorne discovers what I know, matters may become dangerous." Then came the final entry. 3 short lines. "I meet Hawthorne tomorrow. Either this ends, or something worse begins." There were no further pages. No conclusion. No explanation. Nothing. Annabel stared at the final words. A terrible possibility began forming in her mind. What if William's death had never been an accident? What if someone had wanted him silenced? Her hands trembled. There was only one person she could show: Andrew. She found him that evening in the library. Rain tapped softly against the windows. A fire crackled nearby. He looked up as she entered. Immediately he noticed her expression. What happened? Without speaking, she placed the journal before him. His eyes widened the moment he saw the cover. Slowly he opened it. Silence filled the room. Minutes passed. Annabel watched his face. Confusion, disbelief, then pain. Deep, unmistakable pain. When he reached the final entry, his hands began shaking. He closed the journal. For a long time he stared into the fire. Finally he spoke. His voice was barely audible. "I searched for this." Annabel sat beside him. "You knew about it?" "I knew William kept notes." Andrew swallowed hard. "But I never found them." His gaze remained fixed on the flames. Then, for the first time since she had known him, the Duke's composure cracked completely. "He came to me 2 days before he disappeared." Annabel remained silent. "He believed Hawthorne was stealing." Andrew laughed bitterly. "A ridiculous accusation, I thought." His jaw tightened. "I told him to gather evidence before making such claims." The room fell silent. When Andrew spoke again, his voice broke. "He vanished 3 days later." The truth hit her instantly. For 5 years he had blamed himself. Not because he caused William's death, but because he believed he had sent him toward it. "I should have listened." His eyes glistened. I should have protected him. Annabel reached for his hand. This time he did not pull away. What happened was not your fault. You don't know that. I know guilt when I see it. He closed his eyes. The exhaustion of 5 years seemed to settle across his shoulders. Then he whispered, I never stopped looking for answers. Annabel squeezed his hand gently. Then perhaps we've just found one. Slowly he looked at her. Hope. Small and fragile. But hope nonetheless. For the first time since William's disappearance, the mystery no longer felt impossible. They had evidence, a motive, a name, and they had each other. Andrew straightened in his chair, his expression growing determined. What are you thinking? Annabel asked. He looked down at the journal, then back at her. I'm thinking William deserves the truth. A spark of determination ignited inside her. So do I. A faint smile touched his face, the first genuine smile she had ever seen. Then we shall uncover it together. Outside, the storm clouds drifted across the moonlit sea. Inside Blackthorn Manor, husband and wife sat side by side. No longer strangers. No longer separated by silence. United by a mystery that had haunted the Bedford family for 5 years. And somewhere within that mystery lay the truth about William Bedford. A truth they were finally ready to face. The following morning dawned gray and cold. A heavy mist rolled across the cliffs surrounding Blackthorn Manor, obscuring the sea beyond. Yet for the first time in years, Andrew Bedford felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. William's journal lay open across his desk. Beside him sat Annabel, carefully studying each page once more. Every line was examined. Every note scrutinized. Every name considered. There had to be something they had overlooked. And eventually they found it. Near the back of the journal, hidden between ordinary entries, William had drawn a rough sketch. A map. Andrew frowned. I've seen this before. Annabel leaned closer. The drawing showed part of the coastline. A narrow path. Several rock formations. And a symbol marked beside a lighthouse. Blackthorn Lighthouse. An abandoned structure standing several miles north of the estate. The lighthouse had been unused for decades. Few people visited it now. Andrew looked up. William spent time there as a boy. Could he have hidden something? It is possible. Without hesitation they prepared to leave. By noon they were riding along the coastal road. The sky darkened overhead as they approached the lighthouse. Its stone tower stood against the crashing sea like a forgotten sentinel. The wind howled around it. The door hung slightly open. Andrew exchanged a glance with Annabel. Then together they stepped inside. Dust covered everything. The interior appeared abandoned. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. Rotting ropes hung from rusted hooks. At first glance there seemed to be nothing of value. But William had left the map for a reason. They continued searching. Hours passed. Then Annabel noticed something unusual. One section of wall sounded hollow. Andrew fetched a crowbar from an old storage room. Together they pried away the wooden panel. Behind it lay a concealed compartment. Inside were several bundles of documents. And a small metal box. Andrew opened it carefully. The contents changed everything. Financial ledgers. Bank records. Signed agreements. Letters. Years of evidence. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion. Edmund Hawthorne had been stealing enormous sums from the Bedford estates for nearly a decade. The fraud amounted to a fortune. And William had discovered it. Annabel looked at the final letter. Her heart began racing. Andrew? He took the paper. His expression froze. The letter was written in William's handwriting. Dated one day before his disappearance. If anything happens to me, Hawthorne is responsible. Silence filled the lighthouse. Andrew slowly lowered the page. 5 years of uncertainty suddenly had direction. But there was something else. One final envelope remained inside the box. It bore no name. Only a seal. Andrew carefully broke it open. Inside was another letter. This one was written by someone else. A local doctor. The date was 4 years old. Andrew began reading aloud. His voice faltered halfway through. Annabel watched his face pale. What is it? He handed her the letter. She read quickly. Then stared in disbelief. According to the doctor, a severely injured young man had been found on a remote stretch of coastline months after William disappeared. The man carried no identification. He suffered head trauma. He remembered nothing. Not even his own name. The doctor believed he had survived a violent assault. Annabel looked up. He survived. Andrew could barely speak. He survived. The letter continued. The injured man had eventually settled in a small fishing village several counties away, living under another identity, never recovering his memory. For several moments neither spoke. The impossible possibility stood before them. William Bedford might still be alive. 2 days later they departed immediately. The journey north felt endless. Andrew barely slept. Annabel remained beside him throughout, supporting him, steadying him, believing when he scarcely dared to. Finally they arrived at the village named in the letter. It sat along a rugged coastline, small, remote, forgotten by most of England. An elderly innkeeper directed them toward a modest cottage overlooking the harbor. Andrew approached the door. His hands trembled. Then he knocked. Footsteps sounded inside. The door opened. For a moment no one moved. The man standing there had aged. His hair was longer. His face roughened by years of labor. But there was no mistaking him. William Bedford. Alive. Andrew stared. William stared back. Confusion filled his expression. Then something shifted. Recognition. A memory awakening. Andrew? The single word shattered 5 years of grief. The brothers embraced. Neither attempted to hide their tears. For the first time since their marriage, Annabel saw Andrew completely stripped of reserve. No title. No dignity. No mask. Only a brother who had finally found someone he thought lost forever. Over the following days the truth emerged. William remembered everything gradually. Hawthorne had discovered his investigation. A confrontation followed. William had been attacked near the cliffs. Left for dead. The sea carried him far down the coast. He survived. But his injuries stole his memories. Only recently had fragments begun returning. With the recovered evidence and William's testimony, authorities arrested Edmund Hawthorne within weeks. His crimes were exposed publicly. The scandal dominated newspapers across the country. But Andrew cared little about that. He had something far more important. His brother. Several months later William returned to Blackthorn Manor. The house felt transformed. The locked eastern wing reopened. Portraits returned to their places. Laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence. The shadow hanging over the estate finally lifted. One evening near sunset, Andrew asked Annabel to walk with him along the cliffs. The same cliffs where she had once followed him in secret. The same place where he had mourned alone. The sea stretched endlessly before them. Golden sunlight danced across the waves. Andrew stopped beside the weathered stone cross. For a moment neither spoke. Then he turned toward her. "When you arrived here," he said quietly, "I believed my life was already finished." Annabel looked at him. "You were grieving." "I was hiding." His gaze softened. "For years I lived in the past." The wind stirred her hair. Andrew gently brushed a strand behind her ear. "And then you arrived." Emotion tightened his voice. "You refused to fear me." A small smile touched her lips. "You weren't very frightening." He laughed softly. "Many would disagree." The warmth between them felt effortless now. Natural. Nothing like the awkward distance that once separated them. Andrew took both her hands. "Annabel." Her heart quickened. "You gave me back my family." His eyes never left hers. "You gave me hope." Tears filled her eyes. "And somewhere along the way." His voice softened. "I fell in love with you." The words hung between them. Simple. Honest. Perfect. Annabel smiled through tears. "I love you too." The answer seemed to release something inside him. Years of loneliness. Years of guilt. Years of sorrow. Gone. Andrew drew her gently into his arms. Then kissed her beneath the fading light of the setting sun. The sea roared below. The future stretched ahead. And for the first time neither feared it. 1 year later. Summer had returned to Devon. Blackthorn Manor was alive with celebration. William had resumed his place within the family. The estate prospered. The villagers gathered for the annual coastal festival. Music drifted across the grounds. Children laughed. Lanterns glowed beneath the evening sky. Standing on the terrace overlooking the sea, Andrew wrapped an arm around Annabel. His hand rested protectively against the gentle curve of her growing belly. Their first child would arrive before winter. A new beginning. A new generation. Annabel leaned against him. Far below, waves rolled peacefully against the cliffs. The same sea that had once carried tragedy now seemed to carry promise. Andrew kissed her forehead. "Happy?" She smiled. "Very." Together they watched the sunset paint the horizon gold. Not as strangers bound by obligation. Not as a duke and duchess trapped by duty. But as two people who had chosen one another. and who would continue choosing one another for the rest of their lives.